So the value, the utility is really in the conversations that we are going to have afterwards. Question and answers, if you like. Andrew's briefing was very comprehensive. Be yourself, relax, put your feet up. That's why I went to get myself a cup of coffee so that you can see that I'll really be talking to you from the heart. So I thought the best way to tackle this is just to look at maybe 3 buckets. So there's a bucket that I would like to chat to you, which you are comfortable about. That talks a little bit about the economy. And then I'll talk a little bit about the pandemic, because none of us can ignore this. In fact, I don't know a single company that on their risk matrix had paid particular attention to this as something that's going to hit us probably in the next 24 hours. So all of us were indeed blindsided. And then the last bucket, I just want to talk about the vaccine rollout as a consequence of this pandemic. And then as we speak, we'll put it all together so that we've got a sense as to what then is the role of business at these unusually deadly times. Do I have your permission to start? Thank you very much.
Please do. Thank you.
Yes. So let me start by saying 27 years into democracy, there's no doubt that all of us collectively have not succeeded in eradicating the legacy of apartheid, nor the 350 years of colonialism, the 98 years of separate development, and the 48 years of institutionalized apartheid. If we ignore that as business people, then we might misdiagnose the problem and therefore maybe give not so correct dose of medication. But if the level of understanding is the same, i.e. the diagnosis, and maybe we talk a little bit about the prognosis, the easiest part is what medication is then needed. The second point I just wanted to make is, as we celebrate the release of Stats SA, may I ask our colleagues who are not speaking maybe to put themselves on mute, so that we don't disturb the others. You are very kind, and for that I'm grateful. So 3 weeks ago, Stats SA releases the results about the state of the economy, and I just want to pick one number. And they say we have grown GDP positive by 1.2%, which is good news, and I think we must take it. But as business people, we are much more analytical than that. We are much more consequential than that. Because if we accept that Q2 figures ended 30th of June, it's positive 1.2% GDP growth. It tells us a number of things. First, that we are out of the recession formally, because it's 2 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth. But the bigger story for me says, but the population is growing at 1.6%. So actually we are going backwards. But even if you did some crude arithmetic with me, you say if interest rate is 6%, CPI is 3%, then it stands to reason that we need to be growing our GDP by at least 3% just to stand still. So again, by that metric, you can see we're going backwards, especially because this growth is jobless at the time that we actually need jobs. And I'll come back to that point. Jobless growth because today it's 557 days of national lockdown. So none of us can claim to be normal, having spent so much time holed up in our own areas of comfort, as it were, frustrating as it is. So under those circumstances, we know that this economy lost 3.2 million jobs. We created 880,000 jobs, net 2.2 million jobs lost. But to be kind, when we speak to our government, we say we have lost 1 million jobs. 1 million jobs, if one assumes that each of those looks after at least 4 other family members, that's 5 million. It is really catastrophic. The third point I just wanted to make around that is we're not even taking advantage of the commodity super cycle driven mostly by mining, the same way that we missed the commodity super cycle driven by China's demand for coal because our supply chain was not organized. They ended up getting their coal mostly from South America, and we missed out. But also, this 1.2% GDP growth tells us that the Q3 figures, when they're released, they'll be worse than this because of three things. The first is it does not take into account the 2 weeks in July of rampant looting, where the new Minister of Finance, Inaugural, says it might probably take us until 2023 to recover, and we have probably wiped off an entire percentage point of our GDP. Also, it doesn't take into consideration the fact that Transnet had a cyber attack that lasted longer and the economic impact twice as large as the looting itself. I'm not even talking about the third, which is the reports that our Durban port is now rated third from the bottom. Therefore, our supply chain, our infrastructure, the movement of goods and services could be better, and if they are constrained, it has a deleterious effect on the GDP. But also remember that in June, July, August, as we speak, Eskom continues with its rolling blackouts. They now call it with a sexy name, load reduction. But each time the lights go off, we lose anything between 1 billion to 2 billion rands a day, every day. Over a period of a year, we wipe off another full percent from our GDP. Last point I want to make is, but even this growth comes from a broad category that I will refer to as financial services, for a lack of a better word. It's much broader than that. Not where we have an outsized and oversized job creation impact. Like mining, when we're the world's #1 gold producer, we had 980,000 employees in that sector. Now we're down to 400,000. Nor even in manufacturing. And from the Western Cape, I mean, this used to anchor a large part of that economy together with petrochemicals and indeed retail in general, driven out of this manufacturing and textiles hub. But it's not even coming from agriculture, where you don't even need skills to absorb large tranches of people to work in farms. It's not even coming from tourism and hospitality that has the potential and capacity to absorb more women than any other sector. Or even in information communications technology, where we have an opportunity to create our own new world in terms of fourth industrial revolution. So you can see that as we celebrate this positive GDP growth, we celebrate it knowing that when Q3 figures get released, I think we should be tightening our belts and getting our loins in anticipation for a slightly tougher Q3. I park that component. I'll come back to it as we chat a little bit. But maybe let me just close it by saying, but the figures themselves are actually quite horrendous. This is what should concern you and I, because we are now becoming world record holders for all the wrong reasons. For instance, the most unequal society in the world with a Gini coefficient of 0.6. We took over from Brazil 8 years ago. The country with the highest unemployment rate in the world at 44.4% with expanded definition. Because that's the real true measure of it. I mean, that unemployment rate is associated with countries at war. But the one that really concerns me is youth unemployment at 74.9%. So in absolute numbers, the people who are unemployed is 11.9 million people. Let's say 12 million, because I'm amongst friends. And yet, we have 17 million people on social security, when I exclude the 13 million that applied for the 350 temporary relief as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, of which 5.6 million were granted. If you add those, it's 24 million people who are on social security. And yet only 16 million of us are gainfully employed pre-COVID. 6 million young people don't know their fathers. 10 million young people are not in employment, education, and training. Only 30% of households have both a mother and a father. So you can see that it's both systemic and systematic. So when you have young men and women of military age sitting and twiddling their thumb and doing nothing the whole day, not only are you asking for trouble, you are actively inviting it. Because the elements that were present during the Arab Spring, precipitated by Tunisia's self-immolation, are here present and imminent. While Alexander has not gone up in flames, we can only put it down to the patience of our people. The second bucket is a piece around the coronavirus pandemic. And again, just a few sound bites. So we've always understood that this pandemic, it's about two things that we have emphasized well. I think we should have emphasized three. So the first is save lives. That's why national lockdown announced by the president on the 23rd of March gave us 4 days notice, effective midnight of the 26th of June. We thought it was going to last 16, at the very worst, 21 days. As I said, 558th day as we speak today. Convert some public amenities so that when it really hits us that we've got much more than just the usual hospitals, that we get stocks of oxygen so that for those people that are severely ill, at least we are prepared. The second piece was always about preservation of livelihoods, because we knew that this virus will kill 10 times more people out of hunger, starvation, because people have lost their jobs than directly killed by the virus. The third piece that we should have emphasized is how do we break the link between the coronavirus cases and deaths? And the only way you can do that is through vaccinations. Because if you are fully vaccinated, you reduce your chances of contracting the virus. In the likely event that you do, it's unlikely to be so serious that you require hospitalization that might lead to you needing oxygen. But the real benefit is you actually avoid deaths. As data shows us, that 99.8% of all the deaths in the world, including the 88,819 as of last night, just in South Africa alone, come and occur in people that are unvaccinated. So if you follow the science, not the ideology, not the politics, I think the business case is made. So the president rightfully sets us a herd immunity target of 67% of 60.1 million South Africans. That's 40 million people. That's the entire adult population. If we accept that, we need to inoculate 40 million people when the target was set for us in January. It means the run rate has to be 100,000 a day, every day. If we did that in January, it means that it was going to take us 400 days or 13.3 months. Actually, we were planning, agitating, and orchestrating to finish only in 2022. And yet, the then Minister of Health, in complementing this herd immunity target of 67%, then set us another target of 1.2 million frontline healthcare workers that must be vaccinated by the end of March. So when you take the tally on the 27th of March to say, let's see how we are doing. And I compare ourselves only with our BRICS counterparts because we chose to be part of that economic bloc. and you look at only vaccine doses administered, Brazil was already on 579,000, Russia 800,000, India on 2 million, and China 15 million. South Africa, 0. I exclude the Sisonke program as part of Johnson's & Johnson's and Oxford University, where we were part of that trial, where we were getting tranches of 60 to 80,000 vaccines at a time. Even that stopped for a while. So if you are behind as a country, the least you can do in business terms is to double up and try to catch up. And yet, funny enough, it's only when the president spoke to us now during the last family meeting to move us from enhanced alert level number 3 to enhanced alert level number 2, opening up the economy slightly more, that he launches the VOMA program that says we'll try and vaccinate over weekends. We still, up until today, not ordinarily vaccinating over the weekend to show that we are serious about catch-up, except in the private sector. Therefore, because we are behind, the run rate today, if we want to finish and get herd immunity, means the run rate should be 400,000 a day every day today. And indeed, we have capacity to be able to do that. Why we're not doing it is because probably we could be better organized. Of course, the cost for us will be 20 billion. The exposure to the medical care industry is probably 7.6 billion, because only 16.4% of South Africans belong to a medical aid. That's just 2% of their annual premiums. So they've got a vested interest to make sure that their members are vaccinated. And we spoke to this government to say, I mean, if you give us, the private sector, our own vaccines, we could vaccinate our own people at the most within 90 days. So you give Roger Baxter's Mineral Council the 400,000. They worked through alert level number 5 with people that came from Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini. So they know how to handle it. If you gave Adrian Gause at Discovery, he can vaccinate 2 million of his members. Bidvest, 135,000 employees, Imperial, almost the same. But of course, government being in a local municipality here, they thought, you know, maybe let's hold it, let's hog it, because if we get it right, we can use it as a trump card towards the local elections. So the rollout was woefully slow and inadequate. And I'm being absolutely kind. So now the world is opening up. And we are still holed up. No sporting activities, no cultural activities as a direct result of this. But as business people, we have always understood that vaccine rollout, actually it's a race, because the country that can say we have defeated this virus and rooted it out and therefore have reached herd immunity, as defined as 80% of the population that has already developed antibodies to this, will be able to reap the pent-up global tourism demand. Tourism matters because it has the potential to be the greatest forex earner in any country, anywhere else in the world. But for us, the tourism and hospitality sector is 9.8% of the GDP. That's 10.2 million people that were visited before COVID. That first week when we closed down, the numbers moved from 10.2 million to 3.5 million and going down. The GDP contribution moved from 9.8 to 7.5 and still going down. Let me conclude this piece by saying, by the end of June, 11 countries had already vaccinated 100% of their population. 22 had opened their borders to anybody that is fully vaccinated without requiring them to self-quarantine. Even if we compare ourselves with our African counterparts, these 1.3 billion people, 55 countries that speak 3,000 languages with a continental GDP of $3.2 trillion US. 27 countries were already ahead of us in terms of vaccinating their people. So the whole continent, if we are 2% of totally vaccinated, it will be too much. So as a country, as a people with great natural endowments, We'll celebrate when we reach 18 million. But those that are fully vaccinated, we are approaching 10 million. So you can see again, we could do quite a bit. So let me pack that and then conclude with just the 2 weeks in July of rampant looting. So for me, I think this is an intersectionality amongst many things. But let me just talk about 3 in the interest of time. Of course, there was a piece around ethno-tribalism, or tribal chauvinism, if you like, because this was the first time in 27 years of our democracy that we had a former president during his rape trial who'd print T-shirts emblazoned 100% Zulu. Because you see, up until then, we had successfully avoided issues of tribalism associated with countries north of Limpopo. The second piece, that's about 90% of the people that gave us this collective trauma. I think it's just pure criminality. The part that should concern all of us is this piece that I refer to as genuine desperation. And the genuine desperation you could understand, because we're in the throes of not one, but a number of things that coalesce together at the same time to cause probably maximum harm. So we're just beginning to put our arms around the 9 wasted years of state capture, where we stole 1.5 trillion South African rands in just 5 years. That's 2/3 of what it takes Edward Kitzvetter to collect a whole year from all of us in terms of taxes. But we say the 9 wasted years because in those 9 wasted years, we're siphoning off on average about 200 billion a year just to the 2 Zupta families. But we're already in a recession because your discretionary purchasing power and my disposable income for the last 10 years has been eroding. The third that was really buffeting us was that Moody's joined Standard & Poor's and Fitch in rating us below investment grade. As we speak, we are 3 notches below that, which increases the cost of borrowing for government, for business, but also for Andrew and I, for the same quantum of debt. So by the time this coronavirus pandemic found us, we're already prostrate, face down, on the floor and finished. Very few countries in the world will be able to survive one of those cataclysmic events. We had 4 concurrently, simultaneously and in parallel. As if that's not enough, we then saw it fit to put the 5th layer of those 2 weeks in July when we cut our own nose to spite our own face. So we are told about the 12 musketeers who agitated and orchestrated for this wanton destruction. Let me submit as I conclude that I think we probably took the economy of this country back 20 years. And some of the things we'll never be able to fully recover from. So if I take the temperature only on the 19th of July, where you could see that, by the way, this was an internecine strife to settle scores in the ANC. And they demonstrated beyond any shadow of doubt that to settle their own scores, they're actually quite prepared to burn down the whole country. And the people who did this targeted the supply chain. That's why 3 years before we had a group called Amadela Ngogu Bona that were going to construction sites, state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies demanding equity for free, saying when you hire people, you must hire them only from our faction. Issuing edicts like you will not be allowed to bury here if you are a funeral parlor in KwaZulu-Natal unless you are from here. And we let it go for 3 years at least before that. No consequences, thereby sending a strategic conversation that says it's okay to have this lawlessness. But the 3 weeks before this 2 weeks in July, we saw around the Moy River Toll Plaza the burning of 36 trucks in the first day. And again, the N3 is a major tributary between the 2 provinces that together account for 50% of the national GDP. Gauteng at 30%, KwaZulu-Natal at 16%, Western Cape at 14%. So it's people who knew what they were doing with military precision. As I said, some of those things we'll never be able to recover from because more than 354 lives had been lost. 150,000 jobs were put at risk, over and above the 1 million jobs that were lost. 5,000 informal traders were decimated. 148 schools were vandalized or have had equipment stolen, while one school was destroyed in a fire within the first hour in KwaZulu-Natal. 40,000 businesses were affected. 200 shopping centers were looted and damaged. When one considers that 90% of the tenants in any mall are small and medium enterprises, you can see the consequences in terms of creating jobs in large numbers. It's going to be with us probably for the next 10 years. 3,000 stores were looted. 300 bank and post office outlets were vandalized. 1,400 ATMs were damaged where we stole 120 million rand. 161 liquor outlets. Not one exclusive books was vandalized, not one. 113 communication infrastructure was significantly damaged. 11 warehouses, 8 factories were burned. The economic impact was probably 1.5 billion rands worth of stock lost only in Durban, not in KwaZulu-Natal. Massmart released their figures 3 weeks ago. One store, they're saying they lost 1.3 billion worth of stock. So the GDP impact in KwaZulu-Natal is 20 billion. Nationally, that's 50 billion. I'm not even talking about the 1.5 million rounds of ammunition that was stolen from a container at a prospecting depot in Durban, nor the Clicks United Pharmaceutical Distributors that was looted, nor the Cipla Pharmaceutical Company factory in Durban that was burned down. I'm not even talking about the 90 pharmacies that were destroyed, all of them independent pharmacies, where they employ maybe 4 or 5 people, not the big chains I'm talking about. 43,000 vaccines, Pfizer, that's supposed to maintain a cold chain of -70 degrees Celsius. Not even the blood bank was spared. When people went in to steal the fridges, spilled the blood on the floor, with the full knowledge that when they get out of here, they might be hit by a rubber bullet where they themselves might need this blood O type for their own blood transfusion. I end with just 2 comments. You see, when fisher women and fishermen can't go out to sea, they repair their nets. Collectively as business, we need to say, what are we doing to rebuild, to build our nets? Lastly, a child that's not enveloped by his village will burn it down in order to feel its warmth.